Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's Association Essentials series, or AES. We're going to give everybody just a minute to start funneling in. Hope you're having a great day so far. It's a little gloomy where I am right now, but also humid and hot. So hopefully you're all staying cool and comfortable. All right. Looks like we've got several people that came in. So we will go ahead and get started. So today we are going to be talking about budget development foundations. Greg, will you move to the next slide, please? Awesome, thank you. But before we get started, we have a couple of small housekeeping items we wanted to go over. So each month we select a board member of the month. We know how much you guys do in your communities and how much work you put into the communities that you serve, and it's volunteer. It's the best paid position in the whole world. So we really appreciate the work that you do, and so we want to honor those who really make a great effort there. So if you know of somebody, we are always taking nominations. This month's board member of the month is Chuck from La Jolla Hills. He is managed out of our CAM operations. He has been serving for 5 years. He's taken on huge projects, very knowledgeable about HOA rules, and just really great at research. Plus, he never misses a board meeting. That sounds like a great board member to have on your team. So congratulations, Chuck. He'll be receiving some information and a gift card as well. You can nominate a fellow board member if you would like to, or yourself if you feel that you fit that for board member of the month. We would love to hear about those who are serving in the communities that they volunteer in. All right, and then next, we did want to congratulate Kimberly Graff out of CAM. That's our Southern Utah management company. She is our newest PCAM. So if you don't know, that is the highest designation that you can earn in this field as a manager. So if we say it is the master's degree of community management, it's a lot of work. You have to do a case study and it's intense. So congratulations to Kimberly. She's a great addition to the team with that. And then we also do an annual scholarship where we ask homeowners who live in communities where we manage if they'll have an essay prompt that they need to do. And then we will award scholarships to those who have submitted for that. So this year we had a record number of submissions, 145. The essay prompt for that was to describe a community builder they admire and why. We had so many great applications that we couldn't just pick one. So our first place winner comes from an FCS community, Garden Grove. And then we have 4 honorable mentions through several of our management companies in the HOA Living Network that we are just so excited to help support them. And we know that they're going to do great things to help their communities as well. So congratulations to all of our winners this year. And today we're going to learn about budget development foundations. So when you walk out of here, we want you to have a better understanding of the cycle of budgeting, how to plan accordingly, what to analyze, and how to set your assessments properly. So I'd like to introduce our presenter, Greg Gardner. He is also a PCAM. He is our Director of Business Development for HOA Living. He's been with the company for over 18 years, has a ton of experience. And Greg, why don't you take it away and tell us all about budgeting?
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon. Yes, let's talk about budgets. So first, we're going to understand what it is, a budget. So a budget is a tool, and we want to emphasize that it is flexible. This tool is to help you understand you're creating this so that you can have, hey, this is how much we need to pay each month. But inside of that budget, you can have some flexibility because things happen. For example, if you have a lot more snow this year than you anticipated, and you need to move money over into the snow budget versus maybe in the tree trimming or something of that nature. So there is some flexibility that is within a budget, but we're going to talk about it as a living, breathing document that you can move and manipulate and understand. But the bones of it is to understand this is how much we need, and this is how much we're going to have to pay each month to get to where we need to get to. So a well-established budget makes your job as a board member much easier. If you're doing a budget correctly, you're going to have some things that you're going to put inside of there. If you're like, look, we want to, last year we had $150 assessment and that put this much money in and we had excess. So after we look at this year and we we say what's going to raise, what's going to change. Maybe you have some extra money to plan some community events, or maybe you decide that community events are important either way and you want to budget for them. You're going to manage your operations, you're going to have your different services. But the important thing is you're going to establish that assessment amount. So you're going to know, hey, this is how much we need to pay monthly to make sure we can establish and hit all of our expenses. So one thing that we try to do at HOA Living throughout all of our companies is start early. This can be, depending on the size of your budget and how many components are in your budget, it can be a large task. So we want to start early. We've already started. We try to start middle of August, beginning of September. We're going to work on drafting a budget. Now that can happen just depending on you, the board, how you want to do that. If you want to be involved early, if you want to be involved late, we're going to know that having been working with you, but we're also going to have a conversation. Typically, the manager puts a draft together and then gets with the treasurer and they talk about it, make sure it makes sense. Then it gets sent to the board for review. And that's where everybody on the board is looking at it and giving their opinions on it. Hey, let's tweak this, or let's put a little bit more money into that. Once you finalize that, then you're going to send out proper notice. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but you need to make sure you're following your documents for the right notices. And then you're going to publish it. And some associations require that you send out the budget with your notice for annual meetings, some don't. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but that's important to understand what is needed. So part of planning, as I was just saying, let's keep in mind inflation is a real thing. I used to be that curmudgeon that when I would talk to people, I've been doing this for a long time, almost 20 years. Your budget probably needs to go up every year, if nothing else, just to cover inflation. Inflation's a real thing. If everybody remembers 5 years ago, it was double digits. So you need to have those discussions and understand what that looks like. You want your assessments to keep pace with inflation. You don't want to fall behind and be forced to take action. You want to be able to do it through your budget. One tool that we're going to talk about as well today is your reserve study. Your reserve study is going to tell you some big projects that are coming up, whether they're this year or next year or the next year. And so you're going to be looking at that in conjunction when you're creating your budget to understand, do we have the money if it's next year to do the roofs? Do we need to raise assessments a little bit so it's not as steep next year? And that's really what you're doing when you're creating this budget is you're forecasting a little bit, you're looking at this year, but you're also looking at last year and next year, right? Because maybe there was a big project last year you weren't able to do because you didn't have enough money. And so you want to make sure you have that reserve study and you're looking at those large components. And that's why you typically work with the treasurer as the manager to put that draft together and make sure that those key points are hit. And then there's another set of eyes on it, and then send it to the board for everyone to look at. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to consult your governing documents. Some documents are silent, some are not, some are very specific. And so we're going to look at a couple of examples because there are some that are very specific. So you're going to typically look in your CC&Rs. That's usually where that is. Sometimes it is in your bylaws. And so we'll look at some examples of that. You can search your CC&Rs. Here are some tips and tricks here to do that. If you use Control F and type assessment, it'll go find those words inside the documents, or budget or increase dues. There's a few different ones there. But it's important to understand exactly what is needed when you're getting ready to send this notice out. So here's an example from one of our associations. And this is going to, and you can see there's words like may, there's words like shall, and those are important words, right? Because shall is very different than may. May means you can do it. Shall means you will do it. So for this one, in this example, the initial assessment shall be 135. So when it started, whatever year it started, the initial assessment was 135. Now, if you go down to the next section, it says it may be increased, but not more than 20%. So this is where it's important to keep minutes and those documents to understand the trajectory of the budget, right? Because you'll make a motion and you'll raise the budget, say 10%, because you can go up to 20 in this example, and you'll have that. Obviously, you'll then need to send it out to membership to let them know. And if you wanted to do it greater than 20%, you shall have a vote, it says. So it's important to get into the document and understand exactly what these requirements are, because you don't want to make a wrong step and then have to redo everything because you did a may when it should have been a shall. There's also a little section there about special assessments, what to do. Those are different than the budget. That's a separate vote for a separate action. And so you also want to look at that if you get put into that position where you need to do a special assessment. Now, some associations do par value, and that's a little bit different. That means depending on the square footage of the unit is dependent on how much you pay. And so there's a table that shows this square footage pays this amount, this square footage pays this amount, and it breaks that down. And then if you again go to the section 2 here, you have some shalls and mays. And so this association started, it shall be 360 per value, excuse me. So that's what it's going to be. But then again, you have different layers of that, because say that was 1,000 square foot, and then the 1,250 square foot will be whatever percentage above that. This one can go up by 10% from the previous maximum. So that's important, right? So you can't just say, you know, we want to do this, we want to do that. You've got to look at the previous year's budget. If it was 100,000, then you can raise it 10% off of that 100,000. So it's, I hope you're understanding the importance of using the tools that you have, your governing documents, your existing budget, your reserve study, because you want to have all of these tools when you create your budget. Because yes, your budget can be flexible, but there are parameters that you need to use when creating it. And again, it talks about the special assessments, when they may be leveled, how to do it, and to have a meeting and vote for it. So you want to gather all the financial information. And this is important, obviously, because when you're creating a budget, you need to know where to start. So a good rule of thumb is usually look at last year's budget. And we'll get into that in a minute here. But so you want to grab some financial statements. Like I said, you want to have your reserve study. Your service contracts are important to have, so you can understand, do they go up 3% every year? Do they go up 5%? Like, what is that percent that they go up? Do they not go up? You want to talk to them, make sure you understand what that is. You're also going to want to have a balance sheet and a revenue and expenses. So you can see this year we've spent this much already, right? And our balance sheet, this is how much we have in our accounts. So these are all tools that you're putting together, or that you have when you're putting together your budget. So this is the report here, and this is just the revenue portion of it. We'll show the expenses after, but you're going to look at this and go, okay, you know, we have our assessments. That's your big ticket item. That's what you're getting every month from your owners. But then you could also have some ancillary ones. So clubhouse rental, fines, key remotes, late fees, whatever the case may be. Now, typically we don't budget for ancillary. We just budget for the primary income. And then when you have that ancillary, then that's where you get some of that fluidity that I talked about earlier, to be able to move that to where you need it. Sometimes if it's like an RV rental and you have 20 slots and you always rent out all 20, then you could include that as a primary income. But typically anything else you want to, because like a coin slot laundry facility, I mean, you could do an average, but what if it's lower? So typically you don't necessarily budget for ancillary, but you do need to be aware that those are line items that you have. Then you get to your expenses. And this is where you're looking at, okay, so we have a couple of years. If you could see, you have the 23 and you have the 24, and then we're creating the 25 in this example. So we have the previous year's budget and actuals, so we know how much or what was spent there. We have what the year to date for the previous, this would be the current year in this scenario, and then what the budget was. So depending on when you're doing this, sometimes we'll do an annualized, because if you're doing this in September, you still have 4 more months. So you annualize that so you can have those numbers and understand exactly what you're doing. So this is important to have your revenue and expenses. So again, you can check it. And if you're looking at the 2023 budget, you hear those numbers and you're comparing it to 2024, that's going to help guide you into 2025. because if there was a big spike in insurance, you can look at that and understand why. If, it just went up to 3% in the contract for landscaping, then you can look at the contract, make sure, yep, it says 3%. We understand that. We'll make sure we do that for the next one. So it's important, and this is where you can pull those reports in our portal in Vantica. Under board action, you can go into reports, and it has the different reports right there for you to pull as a board member. Now whoops, a little too far. Whoa, here we go. Okay, so when determining, wow, we'll get there, I promise. When determining how you want to do it, typically there's a historical trend and there's zero-based budgeting. We kind of combine the two because, again, as we showed you in the slide, you're looking at previous years' budgets and understanding what went well, what didn't go well, why didn't it go well. Everybody on this call understands that insurance has been crazy ridiculous the last couple of years. The hikes have been astronomical with fires and different things. So sometimes it's hard to budget, but we have very good relationships with our vendors. And we've actually talked to a lot of our insurance vendors, and I mean, we were pretty close. I think they came in and said, hey, it looks like it's going to go up 40% this year. And so we were budgeting for that 40% increase, and it actually went up a little bit more. So we were still off a little bit, but we were in the ballpark because we had that relationship with our insurance vendor that helped us to make sure that not only looking at the previous years, but that was an outlier, right? Because it was going up because of the fires in California. And so having that relationship with those vendors helps to understand not only what's in their contract of the increase, but what they see in their field of expertise and bringing it to us and understanding. That's, talking to the city, making sure, hey, is water going up? Is sewer going up? That's all part of that fact-finding, gathering information. So in establishing a timeline, as I mentioned earlier, we want to get started August, September, start doing all of this homework and getting these reports so that we can get with the treasurer and that we can present this to them. That happens in October. Then we present it to the board, and the board then makes some tweaks and does some different things. That goes into November. And then we finalize it. And depending on what your documents say, if it says you have to send out a copy of the budget, that would go out in December. And then on the back end, we're changing if it went up 10%, if whatever, we're making those changes so that in January you hit the ground running and those increases are there and it's applied onto your statement. So again, gathering all these reports, we're gonna read them, we're gonna understand them, we're gonna analyze them, and they're gonna be tools to help us put this budget together. So typically, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but typically you're gonna do your assessments and interest from investments. If you have CDs and you know what that percentage is going to be, then you can count that as a primary income. And then we talked about those ancillary ones, right? Storage rentals or laundry machines, vending machines, whatever. Those you typically don't know exactly how much you're going to get because who knows? So you don't typically budget for those items. So again, we want to make sure we're checking existing contracts to see what increases are coming our way. We may go out to bid if we're saying, you know what, this year we want to change our landscaper, we want to change whomever, our trash company. You're gonna go and get those bids and have them at this time. So when you're having these discussions, you can plug those numbers in if you choose to go with them. And then of course you want to have your reserve study. So all of these are different contracts that you have typically in an association. Some have more, some have less, but these are the basic ones. So again, you're going to want to look at those contracts. They're in the portal. The board has access to them, and just make sure, and your manager is going to do this, but it's always good to double check and make sure, are there escalators in the contract? Does it say, hey, it's going to go up 3% every year? And again, you want to check with all of them: landscaping, snow removal, security, all of these different vendors. Now, we mentioned reserve study. What is a reserve study? The reserve study is an in-depth evaluation of a community's physical components. So it's a pretty hefty study that comes and says, hey, in the next 30 years, roughly, you're going to need to replace the roofs. And you're going to need to replace the roofs in 2035. And it's going to cost you roughly $1.5 million. And it's going to look at those components and tell you roughly what the cost is so that it can help you budget for that. Now, having said that, just because it says the roofs are gonna go out in 2035 doesn't mean the roofs are gonna go out in 2035. That's a guess, right? They're looking at the wear and tear, they're looking at it. This is a tool. This is an exact science. The roofs might go out in 2032 or it might go out in 2037. But that way, at least you're planning for it. So as you get closer to that, and it's $1.5 million, you can budget so that you're putting money into your reserves to cover that. So when that time comes to replace the roofs, you don't have to do a large, hey, everybody owes $5,000 to replace the roofs. That's the point of using that reserve study while you're budgeting so you can get in front of some of these bigger projects. And I went ahead of the slide there, but yes, so making sure that you're putting money into your reserves to cover those future projects, make sure your study is up to date. If, for example, your study says, hey, you need to replace the pool cover in 2025, but you replaced it in 2024, make sure that's updated and you account for that, because that's going to skew the numbers a little bit. And you want to have as accurate of numbers as you can. So we've gathered all the tools, we have everything that we need. Now it's time to set these assessments and understand what it is that we're going to charge the homeowners, right? So we have regular assessments and special assessments. We're not really going to talk about special assessments today. That's another topic for another day. But that we want to avoid special assessments by doing good regular assessments, right? So again, making sure that we understand how much needs to be charged. So we're looking at the expenses. We budget for the expenses and then we come in with the income. So I mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. Assessment increases need to happen even if just to cover inflation. So boards often don't want to be the bad guys or worry owners that can't afford because they're on a fixed income. This is the nature of an HOA. Everything gets more expensive. If we look at, the cost of milk 5 years ago, it's a lot more expensive today. Everything gets more expensive. And so you want to make sure that your budget is keeping pace with that, so that when somebody moves in and if you try to do a catch up later, they're not penalized. You're the one using these resources right now. You want to make sure that you're covering and paying and pacing it with your budget. The board does have a fiduciary responsibility to do that, right? To not worry about it and push it to the future. Let's take care of it now. Roads are a perfect example of this. The best time to do work on asphalt roads is when they look good, right? Because if you wait until when they look bad, it's way more expensive. So working with vendors and understanding that kind of logic and saying, hey, when do we replace that? You're going to have your reserve study that's going to help with that. But you also want to make sure you're talking with your vendors. Your manager will help you with that and say, hey, our roads are due in 5 years. We could probably do a seal coat in 2 years and maybe push that back a little bit. But talking with the experts and getting their opinions on that will help. But we always want to make sure that we're fixing the problem, not just band-aiding the problem for a later time. So if you don't fund your reserve, there's going to be a special assessment down the road. If you defer your maintenance, there's going to be a special assessment down the road. If you defer payments or raising assessments for that reason, it's just going to cause problems because you're going to get further and further behind. So really, it's important. I can't stress it enough. At a minimum, you guys just raise it to cover inflation. So that way you're at least keeping pace. But again, use all these tools and they will help you to understand why you're keeping pace and how to keep pace. So if you're truly kind of stuck and say your assessments are at 200 and you're like, man, it's really hard to go above 200. There's some other ways to do it, right? A lot of our clients have looked at dropping cable. I mean, this is a couple of years ago, but maybe dropping cable, cutting some costs that you can do. What does that look like? But getting rid of some of those expenses that are driving up the assessment amount. Now, there's some things like insurance you can't cut, right? It says in your governing documents you have to have insurance, so that's not an option. And that is typically one of your more expensive items. So, but just looking at those different things and yes, it's a really good deal to have TV, for example, paid through the HOA, but if that lowers the monthly assessment and people can get that on their own, because everybody consumes TV differently now. So maybe it's a time to have that discussion. So I just threw a lot of information. Let's hit a couple of reminders, and then we'll open it up for questions and make sure that we're all on the same page. But one of the biggest takeaways I want you guys to get from this class is the budget is a tool, and it's a flexible tool. And so it's really a guideline to help make sure you understand how much you need to be charging for assessments so that you don't get in trouble in the future. Keeping in mind cost increases on most services every year. So understand that. Look at the contract, look at what you have so that you understand, talk to the agent if it's insurance, talk to the landscaper, like understand if there's going to be increases. Know what's in your governing documents so that you can notice correctly and how much you can raise it without a vote. Those are very important things. And understand that your manager is here to help you. This is our job. We're going to do the heavy lifting and bring you these resources. But ultimately, you're the one that's making the decision. You're the one with the fiduciary responsibility. But we're going to give you all the tools that you need. So assessments do need to increase when costs go up. Again, we don't want to kick the can down the road. We want to make sure we're covering everything as needed so that there's not a special assessment looming. As mentioned with your governing documents, make sure you know those key dates. Make sure you understand if you have to send out the budget to everybody. Make sure you understand how much you can raise without a vote, because there will be some hard conversations sometimes, especially if you're looking at your reserve study and you have roofs coming up in 2 years and you don't have very much money in your reserves. So do you want to raise it 10% this year because that's the max so that we can raise it 10% next year and have some so we don't have to do as large of a special assessment? Hopefully we didn't kick the can too far down the road to have that conversation. So hopefully, and if you're working with us, we've been having these conversations with you and we're at least discussing it so that you know what your options are. And so that when you do create that budget, it is there for everyone and they understand exactly. Nobody wants to raise assessments. Nobody wants to do that. No one wants to pay more out of the goodness of their heart. But if you explain to them and show them, hey, landscaping went up 3%, the city is charging water went up 5%, and you walk them through it, you can do it in a way that makes sense to them. Again, if they go to the grocery store, eggs are ridiculous right now, right? Milk has gone up. Everything increases. So have that expectation with your owners and let them understand assessments are going to go up every year. It may only be a couple percent, but it's going to go up to make sure that we don't get into a crisis situation in the future. All right. Whoa, crazy there. So Q&A, let's open it up and see. Jessica, I don't know if any questions came in on the chat. What questions do you have? What specifics can we answer for you?
It looks like we have Dorothy who has her hand up. So I'm going to allow her to talk so she can ask right now. Dorothy,
Absolutely.
what's your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Dorothy.
Okay. Thank you first for this wonderful presentation.
You're
It answers a
welcome.
lot of questions. I have one question. How do I convince the rest of the board that we must do at least cost of living raises?
Again, you're going to have to use logic with them. And this is one of the harder things is education, right? You need to educate your board. Look, if we don't raise it at least 3%, next year that's 6%, and the next year that's 9%. Like it gets bigger and harder as you kick it down the street, so to speak. So you just have to use logic and work with them. And I don't love using scare tactics, but maybe you find some stories about HOAs that haven't done it and say, hey, we don't want to be these guys. We want to be smart about our money. We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And also it's your fiduciary responsibility. That's why you're on the board, is to do that. So
Yes, I thank you for pointing that part out. I've been on the board at my HOA previously and was off for a few years, but I'm back on now. I just have to get at least the cost of living part across to them. You have
Yes.
a beautiful presentation. Can I print the presentation out and share it with my board members?
Yes, so Dorothy, everybody who registered will get an email with links to the PDF as well as a recording of this session. So you'll have that, and then it will also be on our website by the end of the week. So yes, you'll have that and be able to share it with your fellow board members.
That's wonderful.
Dorothy,
Thank
I would
you so much.
also share the reserve study with those other board members and just point out some of the bigger projects that may be coming. And so
Yep.
to keep pace so that, again, you can focus on those, because you don't want to do an all or nothing. That's hard, right? It's smarter to do 10% a year than 50% at once.
Yeah, we got way behind and got in trouble previously, and
Oh,
they have
then maybe
they haven't
point to
learned.
that. Yeah, just
You
say, hey,
haven't
remember
learned.
this happened. Let's not do that again. Let's stay ahead of it this time.
Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Absolutely. Great question. Thanks, Dorothy.
You're welcome.
All right, Greg, we've got a bunch of questions and some hands
All
up.
right.
So David is asking if you need a lawyer involved if you are reducing discretionary spending, example, dropping landscaping for homes. And then, so that's question
All right,
one. Question two.
let's take that one real quick.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So if you have services that, now it depends on what your documents say, but if you have services that have always been provided, legally, you don't have to have a vote, but I would tell you 100 times out of 100 times to have a vote. Because if I've been a part of this association for 10 years and you've always taken care of my landscaping and now you decided not to do it, we probably want to have a community discussion about that, because it's easier to get in front of that and explain the logic behind it, why you're doing it. A really good example of this is when you raise your deductible on your insurance. We've been encouraging all of our associations to raise their deductibles, right? Because that helps keep your premiums down. The premium for a homeowner to raise their deductible, their loss assessment amount from say $25,000 to $50,000 is not that much. It's about $15 to $20 a month. But for the savings the association gets from lowering that is a lot more. But it's still good to have that conversation, whether it's a town hall meeting, whether it's a newsletter that goes out, and have that so that people are aware of why you're thinking of doing it and get some feedback and see, because while you might think it's a great deal, maybe the homeowners don't. And so I would always say get ahead of that. But legally, you can make that change. But again, if it's implied because it's been something that you've always done as an HOA, I would definitely involve the homeowners.
Okay, and then his second question on that is if, say they meet and they decide something and they want to have two different versions of landscaping based on desires of individual homeowners, is it possible to have that and have two versions of assessments based on those desires?
It's possible. I wouldn't recommend it. What I would recommend is that you do a base for everybody and then let the landscaper work that out with the individual homeowners. That's a nightmare to track if you're doing that. And people are coming and going, yes, I want it, no, I don't want it. But if you give the same service to everybody and then let the owner talk to the landscaper and set that up, that would work much easier.
Awesome. Okay. We've got Chris has a question about how do you balance assessment increases versus consuming some of the accumulated net income?
So again, if you're looking at your reserve study, some of that net income is going into reserves, right, for future projects. And so now I've done what I lovingly refer to as a reverse special assessment, where the special assessment maybe needed to be $15 and we started at 25 and then went down to 20, then to 15, and built some working capital to put into reserves for future projects. So you can do that. And again, if you're collecting every year, if you're looking, and that's why you use that historical budget, right? If you're looking at that and every year you have $5,000 or $6,000 extra, you can start to have that discussion. We probably don't need to raise assessments this year for inflation. We overshot a little bit, and have that discussion. I would caution you about lowering assessments, because once that genie's out of the bottle, it's very hard to put back in. I would much rather just not raise assessments for a year or two if you're surplus than lowering assessments, because you're gonna then end up having to raise them back up, and it's a much harder discussion to have.
Okay, awesome. All right. David asks if board members have a fiduciary responsibility, can board members be sued by other members of the association or residents?
Yes. The short answer is yes. And that's why you should have an officers and directors policy, which that insurance says, hey, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and we're listening to experts, then you're covered and the insurance will cover you. But yes, you can be sued as a board member if somebody wants to sue you.
Okay, great. Let's go to Scott, who has his hand up. I'm going to unmute him now. So Scott, if you want to unmute yourself, and then ask your question.
I wanted to find out, we just became a board as we were turned over, and our reserves are at about 150%. And I wondered, I just heard that you said that you wouldn't lower the assessments, but when you have extra reserves, would you go ahead and just keep it? Would your recommendation be to keep your assessments consistent?
Yes, I would say at that point, look, there are times when you can lower your assessments. If you're that over, that might be a talking point. I just caution, don't be too aggressive, because you don't want to yo-yo. You don't want to lower them then raise them back up. I would much rather just have that talk with your owners and say, hey, we're going to keep assessments where they're at for a little while, because we're in a really good spot. Because you never know what could happen, right, Scott? Like, insurance could go crazy. There could be an act of God, like, you don't know. So since you've already collected it, unless you have a majority of your owners really, working you to return the money, I would say leave that in your reserves and maybe redo your reserve studies showing that you have that. So that would give you the backup that you don't need to raise your assessments for, probably 5-6 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, awesome. So Paul is asking about, with our variety of community management companies and experience across so many areas and communities, do we provide benchmark data on expense increases that we're anticipating or seeing, like amenities and utilities? I know our community managers will be going through and asking vendors what to anticipate, but do we provide any of that to boards as far as like that benchmark data?
No, not necessarily from a company standpoint. It would be done individually from your manager, because every association is so different. It's really, the only exception to that would be if you're in a city and the city's increasing water and sewer, for example, 3%, then yes, we would do that. But typically, insurance or landscaping or whatever, those are so individualized, it's really hard to do that. But yeah, city utilities might be the exception to that.
Great. Okay, Byron asks if, when we have seasonal expenses, per se, like lawn care, should your budget show equal amounts every month or realistic amounts just during the months where you're likely to have those expenses?
That's up to you as a board. Some people do budgets with notes in them. If it is equal payments, like, hey, it's going to be heavier. And really, that's just up to you as a board of how you want to see it, what's easiest for you. As long as you can remember, if you do that and it's equal payment, so to speak, that, because you'll be getting your income statement and you'll be like, wow, we're way over budget on snow removal in July, but then in October it goes way down because you start moving the snow. So it's really your preference. And there's, I see both schools of thoughts. I've worked with boards that do it both ways. I personally like to do it monthly just because it makes sense to me. But yeah, it's really just your preference.
All right, and the next one is from Roger. During the pandemic, there was a lot of inflation, and now most reserve studies are out of date and the amounts are off. How often, I think we had this on a slide, but how often should a reserve study be done? I think the answer we usually say is it depends on so many things.
Yeah, it does depend. Exactly. Every state's a little bit different, so you would need to check your state statutes. But I would tell you, so in that example, it's not a bad idea when we came out of COVID and inflation dropped from 12 back down to 5 or 6 to maybe just do a refresh. A refresh on your reserve study doesn't cost nearly as much as an initial reserve study. They don't have to come out to the site. I mean, it saves a lot of money. You know, it's probably a third of the cost roughly. So I would do a refresh. In my state where I live, you have to do a new one 6 years and refresh every 3. So it just depends on where you're at. And so you would need to check your local state statutes on that. But if there's a big change, again, so if your reserve study says don't do the roads until 2025 and you did them in 2023, I would refresh your reserve study in 2023 when you did the roads.
Awesome. Well, that's all the questions we have right now. If anybody else has any, you're welcome to push a raise hand or click the Q&A. It should be either on the bottom of your screen or the top. But Greg, I guess while we wait to see if there's any last questions, I think one of the things that I remember from last year is some hesitancy on timeline. Like, I know obviously as a management company, we're here to help them stay in the black. But we do have deadlines for things. And so why is it most helpful? Like we want to have budgets in by November 1st. What happens if we miss that? And what can boards kind of anticipate that could be the issue if they, like, we want them to review this, be a part of it, approve it. But if we miss that deadline, what are some things that may be impacted that they should be aware of?
Yeah, no, we want to be proactive. We don't want to miss those deadlines, because if you miss certain deadlines, then you don't get to do your budget. Right? If your documents say your budget has to be done by this date and it's not done, you just revert back to last year's budget. And that can be problematic, especially as we talked about with increases needing or inflation or different things. So you want to make sure you're hitting those deadlines, and you want to start early, to Jessica's point, so that you can have this interaction. You know, every manager knows the property, but the board knows it better. So it's really important to have that, hey, here's our draft budget, because I'm going off of historical and some different things, but you guys really have the pulse of the neighborhood. And so you might know that something's going to happen in next spring or whatever. And so have maybe some insider information, so to speak. So it really is beneficial to work with your manager. Let them bring you the tools, let them bring you that draft, and then have a discussion, whether it's an hour or half an hour, or send it out and let everybody look at it and digest it and then have a discussion. But it's really beneficial for the board to buy into that budget, and make sure they understand why it got increased 5%, 10%, whatever the number is. So that, because you're going to be out walking your dog and get stopped and get asked. And it's good to have an understanding of that and be on the same page and everybody pulling the same way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, but I was just going to cover what you have up here on the screen really quick. You guys are welcome to follow us on social media. We share a lot of helpful tips and things related to budgeting, but all other things related to community management and board responsibilities there. We also have a community scoop, which goes out every so often for information on what's trending in the industry and what you need to prepare for. The next community scoop will have a lot more budgeting tips and information as well. Our website has all of the past recordings. So if you need to learn about governing documents or your responsibility as a board member, we probably have a video for that to help you out as well. And then YouTube, we have a YouTube channel with all of our videos there as well. So we look forward to connecting with you guys. We're here to help. HOAliving.com/AES for Association Essentials Series is where you can view all of those recordings. And next month's training is going to be preparing for annual meetings. So you're going to have your budget already and you got to present this. And how are you going to be ready for it? So we want to help you prepare, especially if you know that there's some financial concerns or questions. Those can be a little bit intimidating. And so we want to help you prepare with that. And that's what we'll be covering next month. So thank you, Greg, so much for the great presentation, and everyone who has attended. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you later.
Thank you.